Hi, I'm Dave Vickers and welcome to the Photo Show. We've got the next part of our Nikon D7100 User Guide now, and in this episode we're going to be taking a look at the Custom Settings menu. Now this is the biggest menu within the Nikon D7100, so I'm going to split it up into two parts just because there's so many sections to look through. And this will allow you to customize your camera to set it up to be exactly the way you want it to be. Remember, if you like what you see on the Photo Show, please comment, like and subscribe in the boxes below. Here's the first part of the Nikon D7100 Custom Settings menu. In the last episode we were looking at the shooting menu within the D7100, and this time we're going to come down to the next in the option here, the little pencil icon, and this is your Custom Settings menu. And this is where you can set up various parts of the camera within different groups, and you can see here we've got 7 different groups within this menu. It's a big menu. You've got A for autofocus, B for your metering exposure, C for timers and AE lock, D for shooting and display, E for bracketing, flash, F for controls, and G for movie. It's a big menu, so we're going to go through these individually. And first off, right at the top here, you've got an option to reset custom settings. So if you've already played around with this menu and you have a bunch of settings in there and you want to go back to how it came out of the factory, you use this option here, and obviously you pick yes, click yes, and that would reset it back to the factory settings. I'm going to click no because I've got settings in here that I want to keep. So let's move on down, and the first part of this menu is the A section. As you can see from there, it's the autofocus. So if we click OK, we're now into a bunch of different options that you can adjust with your autofocus within the camera. First one here, which is A1, which is AFC priority selection. So if you're in AFC continuous servo mode, or AFA, this works as well. This is giving you your priority selection. So you click OK, and you've got 2 options here. The first option is release, and this means that when you fire the shutter, the shutter will take an image regardless of whether the camera is locked focus or not. So it will take the image, but it won't necessarily be in sharp focus because the camera hasn't attained autofocus lock. Next one down is focus, which means the shutter will only fire once the camera has attained focus and the autofocus system has locked a focus, then the shutter will fire. So it's entirely up to you. I'll keep that on focus because I want to know that the images I'm shooting are obviously sharp and in focus. Next down, A2, is AFS priority selection, which again is the same system, but if you're using the AFS single servo autofocus, and you've got the same 2 options there for release and focus, and again exactly the same. If it's on release, it will fire regardless of whether the focus is locked, and focus will only fire once the camera has attained focus. Next one down is focus tracking with lock on. And this is if you're using AFC or AFA focus on your camera, and you're shooting something like sport where you've got lots of moving subjects, and you're trying to concentrate on one part of the image. This will prevent if another player wanders between you and the shot you're looking for. It will prevent the camera from looking for a fresh autofocus too quickly. It basically sets the time that the camera allows before it looks for a new autofocus point. You've got 6 options. One is short, so it will take a very short time to look and react quite quickly. 2, 3, we're going up to 5, which is the longest, and it will take longer then. It's a way of preventing the camera from just hunting around looking for focus. If you're focusing on a subject part of the game and another player just wanders in front of your field of view, it stops the camera from looking for that as the focus point within a quick amount of time. And obviously at the bottom there you've got the option to turn that off completely. I'd leave it on. I don't shoot a lot of sport, so it's not much of an issue for me, so I'll tend to leave it on the factory setting of normal. Next down is autofocus point illumination. And this is when you're looking through the viewfinder and you press your shutter, the autofocus point will light up in red. As in this point, let's go to there. We've got 3 options here. We've got auto, on or off. Auto will mean that the camera would decide whether to light up the autofocus point or not. It will depend on the brightness of the situation. If you've got a very bright subject, very bright day, the camera will light up the autofocus point to allow you to see it against the bright background. On means that the autofocus point will always light up as red, and off will mean it won't light up as red at all. It will just stay as a black box, and that's the way it is. I keep it on because I like to know that the autofocus point is visible and you can see it. The next one down is A5, and this is your focus point wraparound. And because when you're looking through the viewfinder, you've got a choice of 51 autofocus points. If you're scrolling along using the command dial, bringing the autofocus point across, when you get to the edge of the screen, this dictates whether it just stops there or whether it wraps round, which means it comes back in the other side of it'll go, once it's gone across your field of view, it'll come back round and start again at the other side, like if you're playing a game like Pac-Man or something like that. So you've got the choices there of the wrap or no wrap. No wrap means the autofocus point will just stop and you'll have to guide it back to where you want it. Wrap means that it will come back round and start again at the other side of your viewfinder, so you can see where your autofocus points are. Next one is number of autofocus points, and on the D7100 you've got a maximum of 51 autofocus points. But sometimes if you're someone that uses the command dial here to move your autofocus point around a lot, 51 may take a lot of time for you to find the one you want. So you can reduce that down to 11 points, giving you less options to pick from, but obviously you will be able to move your autofocus points faster than that. I tend to work quite slowly with moving the autofocus point, so I keep it on the 51 points. And the last one in this section of the menu is your built-in AF assist illuminator. Now, I tend to keep this off. If I spin the camera round, I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's turn it on for a start. So now it's on. And what this is on the front of your camera, we have just here a small light that if you're in low light and you're trying to focus, you can see there, will light up to give a bit more illumination to the subject to allow you to help the autofocus to lock focus. I tend to keep this off, mainly because if I'm shooting candid shots and suddenly a bright light comes on, it tends to attract people's attention. So if you're trying to sort of capture a scene where you want it to be a candid shot, and suddenly a bright light comes on your camera, people tend to look towards it, and that can ruin that effect of having a candid shot where people aren't noticing. But it's entirely up to you. If you want a bit of help in low light to gain autofocus, then you can turn the autofocus illuminator on, and that will help you there. So that's the A section of the custom settings menu looked at. Let's move on now to the next one down, which is the B section, which is metering and exposure. So if we press OK here, that enters into that menu section. And you can see we've not got as many here in the B section. There's only 5 different options here. So we'll start by looking at B1, which is ISO sensitivity step value. And what you've got here is 2 options. It's you've got the option of your ISO increasing or decreasing in increments of 1/3 of a step or 1/2 of a step. It's entirely up to you which one you want to choose. So I'm going to keep it on 1/3 of a step there. The next one down is your EV steps for exposure control. So this is if you're using the exposure value, your bracketing options, your exposure value settings, what increments you can increase or decrease that by, whether it's 1/3 of a step or 1/2 a step. And again, you've got the choice there of the 2. Next one here is easy exposure compensation. And what this basically does is allow you to, let's go in there. We've got 3 different options here. We've got on with auto reset, plain on, and off. And what this is, it's a way of adjusting your exposure values without using the exposure value button on the top of the camera here. It's dropped out of focus. Normally if you're adjusting your exposure value, you hold that down and you'll use the rear dial, the rear command dial on the back of the camera here, to increase or decrease your exposure value. What this menu allows you to do is to use the front and rear command dials to adjust your exposure value up or down. On auto reset means that if you make any changes using the front and rear command dials to your exposure value, as soon as the camera turns off or goes into sleep mode, that will reset back to 0. So the settings you've changed using the two dials will reset back to 0, so you're starting afresh. On means that you're using the front and rear command dials on the camera to adjust your exposure value, and those values will hold there until you change them manually yourself. And off means that these two dials aren't being used for the exposure value. You're just using the exposure value button on the top and the rear command dial to adjust the values as required. I tend to keep that off, but the choice is yours. Next one down, B4, is center weighted area, and this is if you're using center weighted metering. This is to determine what area of the center of the frame the metering reading is taken from, and you've got options of 6mm, 8mm, 10mm, 13mm, and average. And average will take an average from the entire frame, much like matrix metering, but I tend to keep it on 8mm, so there's a differential between center weighted metering and spot metering. I don't want it too small an area of the frame. And the next one down is fine tune optimal exposure. And if we go into this, let's click OK. You can see immediately now we've got a warning screen come up. It says exposure compensation icon will not display when exposure is altered from the default values. Continue in a Ron Burgundy question mark type of way. So if we say yes to this, basically what's happening here is it's allowing you to fine tune each of your metering modes. You've got matrix metering, center weighted metering, spot metering, and you can fine tune each of those up or down, plus or minus one step in increments of sixths by the look of it. I'm going to put it back to 0 because I don't want to do that. But what that warning screen was telling you is if you change those settings within this part of the camera, it's not going to display anything on your top screen here to tell you that you've changed it. If you use the exposure value button here, when you've changed it, you can see you've got the little icon on your screen there telling you that that is active. If I go back to 0, that's now disappeared. If you change your fine-tune your metering within this section, that will not display on the top. So if you've made changes to this, you've got no visual symbol to say that you've made exposure value changes to the camera. Okay, so that's the B section taken care of. That's probably the shortest part of this menu. Let's move on to the C section now. And we've got shutter release A lock, and that's this button on the back of the camera here. And what that's when you're using that. That is when you hold that button down, it's going to lock your exposure value. So if you're shooting a scene and you've half pushed the shutter and you've taken a reading, you can hold that button in, and that will lock that exposure reading. Even if you move the camera around, it won't re-meter the scene. So you can have that on or off. So you've got a button there. So if you're taking exposure reading, say you want to take a reading from the highlights or the shadows, you take your reading, you hold the button in there, and it will hold that reading until you let go of the button. So that's that part, and you've got an on or off section with that. Next is your standby timer, and basically what this is doing is it's telling the camera how long that you want it to continue reading exposures when nothing's happening, when you're not pushing the shutter button. How long does the camera continue to meter your light conditions? And you've got choices of 4 seconds, 6 seconds, 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 1 minute, and it goes all the way through 30 minutes or no limit. Obviously the higher you go, the more the camera is active for a longer period of time, and the more drain on the battery it will take. I mean, most times if you're shooting, you're going to be half pushing the shutter to read the exposure anyway, so I keep that on the default of 10 seconds there. Next one down is your self timer, and your self timer, as we've shown in other videos here, is activated by turning this wheel here, and you've got the little clock symbol there, which is your self timer. So if you're wanting to take self time shots where you push the shutter and there's a delay before the camera actually fires, this is where you set your delay within the camera. So the first option here is self timer delay, and you've got options within here of 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds or 20 seconds. That's the delay time from when you push the shutter for when the shutter actually, when you push the shutter button to when the shutter actually fires, to take an image. So you're selecting the time delay there. Next one down is number of shots. So you can choose when you've set the self timer whether it takes anything between 1 and 9 shots. Once the 10 seconds or whatever time you've set has elapsed and the shutter fires, you can then choose that it takes 1 shot or anything up to 9 shots. And then the last part here is you've got the interval between those multiple shots. You've got choices of 0.5 of a second, 1 second, 2 seconds and 3 seconds. So yeah, you can use it like an interval timer, but it's a slightly less involved option for using the self timer within the camera. So let's go back to where we are. Next one down is monitor off delay. So here's where you customize your back screen. So it depends on what, you can choose which function you're using your back monitor screen of the camera for, and how long each of these operations lasts for. So playback is when you want to review an image, you press play and the image comes up on the screen, and you can choose how long that image stays on the screen for you to view. And you've got 4 seconds, 10 seconds, you can go all the way through to 10 minutes. 10 seconds I normally find for me is enough time to review it. Menus, like we're doing now. So if we just left this screen on, that's currently set at 1 minute. You've got a bunch of options, 4 seconds through to 10 minutes, again the same options. So if I just left this menu screen on, didn't touch any of the functions, didn't move any of the options, within 1 minute the screen would cut off back to blank. Information displays, same again. If you've pushed the I button and you're getting information up, you can choose how long that stays on the screen. Image review, that's when, if you've got this set, and if you take an image, I have it set so that the image pops up on the back of the screen and it lasts for 4 seconds, which gives me just enough time if I need to glance at the image and check that I'm getting the exposure. And then live view, if you're using the camera in live view where your screen on the back here is your viewfinder, how long, when there's no actions taking place, when you haven't pushed the shutter or you haven't changed any settings, how long before that shuts off into back to sleep mode, save battery. And a lot of this is all about saving battery life and keeping the camera up and running. And the last one in the C section here is remote on duration, and this refers to if you're using the additional remote that you can get with the camera, which is the ML-L3, how long that stays active when you're using it, and you've got choices there between 1 minute and 15 minutes. Again, it's if you use the remote a lot, it gives you a bit of customability to be able to set that up for time limits and saving battery life again.